Allah and He'll protect you. احفظ تجده تجاهك. We ask ourselves, where is Allah? Where is Allah? But the question is, where are we? The Prophet ﷺ says to Ibn Abbas, احفظ تجده تجاهك, that protect the bounds of Allah, you will find Him in front of you. Protect the bounds of Allah and you will find Him in front of you. It's hard to rely on something that you don't perceive. And oftentimes we think we don't perceive Allah. Allah is beyond our perception in terms of our senses, of course. He's beyond perception in terms of our intellects, of course. But Allah manifests His mercy and Allah manifests Himself in His creation through His names and attributes such that we are able to rely on them. That Allah manifests mercy through the mother, and Allah manifests kindness to a compassionate friend. Allah manifests His name Ar-Ra'uf. And so when we find ourselves to be people who our concern is to guard the bounds of Allah, then tajidhu tujahak, then we find Him in front of us, and then the question is answered, where is Allah? Allah is evident in front of us at all times. فَإِنَّمَا تَوَلُّوا فَثَمَّ وَجْهُ اللَّهِ. Everywhere that you turn, then there is the countenance of Allah, كَمَا يَلِيقُ بِجَلَالِهِ, as is appropriate for His majesty. Allah being outside of space and time, but Him, we find His support. We find Him as a support, as a reliance when we guard the bounds of Allah. And then he continues, the Prophet ﷺ continues to Ibn Abbas radiallahu anhu, again speaking on the idea of support. وَعْلَمْ, know, recognize, أَنَّ الْأُمَّةَ, had the entire ummah, the entire nations, whether it be the ummah of the da'wah or the ummah of istijabah, the ummah that is yet to become Muslim, or the ummah that has accepted Islam. لو اجتمعوا إن اجتمعوا على أن ينفعوك بشيء لم ينفعوك إلا بشيء قد كتبه الله لك. That if the entire ummah, the entire nation, whoever it may be, all of creation had gathered to benefit you by a single thing, they would not be able to benefit you except by what Allah has already decreed for you. وإن اجتمعوا على أن يضروك بشيء لم يضروك إلا بشيء قد كتبه الله عليك. And if they had all gathered to harm you by a single thing, they would not be able to harm you except by what Allah has already written out to be. رُفِعَتِ الْأَقْلَامِ وَجَحَّتِ الصُّحُفِ. That the pens have been lifted and the pages have dried. Allah has written out the decree and it's not going to change. The final decree. The du'as that we do can change what we know of the decree, what may be perceived perhaps to the angels, but what is the final decree is set with Allah. And this often puts us in despair. We ask the question, are you saying that there's nothing I can do? And the answer that yes, there is nothing that you can do, in one way can lead to despair. And in the other way leads to what? It leads to reliance that Allah has already decreed my rizq. Allah has already decreed my provisions. Allah has already decreed where my wealth comes from, who my family is. Allah has already decreed these things. What do I have to do to worry about it? That Ibn Ata'illah Iskandari, rahimahullah ta'ala, one of the great ulama of this tradition, he says that Allah hasn't asked you for tomorrow's ibadah. He only asked you for today's ibadah. He hasn't asked you of that. Why are you asking for Allah for tomorrow's provisions? Allah hasn't charged you to do tomorrow's ibadah, to do tomorrow's responsibilities. Why do you ask Allah for what He is going to give you tomorrow? That Allah has already guaranteed us that our rizq is going to come, and not a single morsel of food, nor a single drop of water, nor a single emotion, the emotions are our rizq, nor a single ibadah. The ibadah that we do, the worship that we do is the rizq, the provisions that Allah gives us, the spiritual sustenance that Allah gives us. Nor any happiness or any smile, nor any sadness, it's all written. It's not going to change. But this does not excuse us from what? From taking our asbab. because there's the ultimate reality of what Allah has already decreed. But there is the experience that we have in this world where we are asked to act upon what we experience. That in that sense, we do have that will. We do have that free will to act upon what Allah has, these situations that Allah has manifest. That there's the choice of, do I want to get up and pray? Do I want to take this bite of food or not? And that is what is asked of us, to act on these asbab, to ask on the means that Allah has placed in this world, without ever affirming any effect of these means themselves. That we believe wholly that Allah is the one who is in control, but Allah is taking us into account for how we interact with the means, and how do we show our conduct with ourselves and the rest of creation, Allah Azza wa Jal. That is where our responsibility comes in. So that when we want to be people of tawakkul, people of trust, of reliance on Allah, if we don't find ourselves understanding that Allah is going to give us what He has promised us, and Allah is going to not give us what He hasn't promised us. What Allah has decreed is going to happen, and what Allah has not decreed is not going to happen, even if the entire ummah and beyond were to gather to change a particular thing, it wouldn't be possible. Until we understand that reality, it's hard to have trust in Allah, because we give too much to ourselves. We give too much credit to ourselves in that sense, where we think, if I do this and I do that and I do this, then eventually this other thing will happen. And this isn't to say that we shouldn't be taking our means. Just as we take our means with our, sometimes we take these sort of statements to drop our responsibilities. One of our teachers said, if you want to drop your responsibilities with this, believing that if Allah decides that He is going to make me pray, then Allah will make me pray and I don't have to do anything. And if Allah decides that He's not going to make me pray, then He won't do that. He said, when people say things like that, you should ask them to do the same with their food and with their sleep and with their water. And say, if Allah is going to satiate me, He'll satiate me. And if Allah won't satiate me, He won't satiate me. They shouldn't bother to eat their food or drink their water or take a nap when they're tired or whatever it may be. And these are the type of games we play with Allah. When you play games with Allah, Allah plays games with you. If you play games with Allah, there's no winning that game. And until we recognize that this deliberation that we do in our actions is not going to bring us anything except what Allah has already decreed, we won't find comfort in our lives. أقول قولي هذا واستغفر الله لي ولكم ولسائر المسلمين يا قوم استغفروه إنه هو الغفور الرحيم. Bismillah walhamdulillah wassalatu wassalamu ala rasulillah wa ala alihi wa sahbihi wa man wala. Imam Mustafa Kaban Sharif says that one of the scholars of the last 150 years or so says that if you want to relieve yourself of anxieties and distress, then put yourself in a position where you don't depend too much on yourself and recognize your dependence on Allah. Because either you're going to stress and have anxiety and be anxious over fulfilling the means that you have already seen in place, and then worry too much about the results, and either what you're going to do is going to occur or not occur. So before you do the action, there's the stress, and then after the action, whether according to the result there's also stress or lack of stress. That if you don't find what you wanted to occur, if you don't find it to occur, then you have double the stress, because you think to yourself, I've done all this effort, and I have, put in my whole entire, I did everything, right? This is the I. If there's always the ana, the me, the I, there's very little room for huwa. There's very little room for He, Allah Azza wa Jal. And when we put ourselves in that sort of situation where it's always the I, what did I do? Then we find ourselves disappointed by our actions and our means that we took, and then we're also disappointed by the result. But if we see it as Allah has enabled me to take these means, and whatever the result happens, that's up to Allah, then the worry of the anxiety, the distress that we are putting ourselves in when fulfilling these actions is lifted to a considerable degree, and then the result we know is with Allah. So whatever happens, we are thankful that Allah either rewards or punishes according to the intention that we had, and whatever happened after, that's in the hands of Allah, and it's not up to us. And so we ask Allah that He makes us a people who are not people of anxiety and people of anxiousness and people of stress and people of deliberation. We ask Allah that He makes us people who are complete tawakkul, complete trust in Him. We ask Allah that we are people who have trust in the Sharia that He sent down, and trust in the Prophet ﷺ that He sent down. We ask Allah that we have complete trust in the means that He has given us, knowing that they come from Him, and not trust in them in any other manner. We ask Allah that He makes us people who are trusting in His plan. We ask God that we are people who are trusting in His bounds, that people who guard His bounds. We ask God that we are people who are protected by Allah. We ask Allah that we are people who find Allah in front of us. We ask Allah that we are people who are benefited only by recognize that we only are benefited by what He decides to benefit us with. And we ask Allah that we are people who are only harmed, who only see our harm coming from Him Azza wa Jal by what He decreed harm us. We ask Allah that He remove us from the harm of stresses and of the emotions that come when we leave our alliance with Allah. We ask Allah for relief from those anxieties. We ask Allah for complete solace and complete serenity and complete peace in Him. So we say, Allahumma anta salam ومنك السلام تبارك يا ذا الجلال والإكرام حينا وادخلنا دار السلام ربنا آتنا في الدنيا حسنة وفي الآخرة حسنة وقنا عذاب النار ربنا هب لنا من أزواجنا وذرياتنا قرة أعين واجعلنا للمتقين إماما. We ask Allah to bless our teachers, particularly our first teachers, our parents. رب ارحمهما كما ربياني صغيرا 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 رب ارحمهما كما ربياني صغيرا. We ask Allah that we recognize that Allah and His angels send the benedictions and salutations on the Prophet ﷺ, and we're asked to do the same. Inna Allah wa malaikatahu yusalluna ala an-nabi ya ayyuha alladhina amanu sallu alayhi wa sallimu taslima. Allahumma salli ala Sayyidina Muhammad wa ala ali Sayyidina Muhammad wa ala azwaji Sayyidina Muhammad wa ala ashabi Sayyidina Muhammad wa ala atba'i Sayyidina Muhammad wa ala ahbabi Sayyidina Muhammad wa ala ummati Sayyidina Muhammad wa barik wa sallim wa salli alayhi. Inna Allah ya'muru bil 'adli wal ihsani wa ita'i dhil qurba wa yanha 'anil fahsha'i wal munkari wal baghi يعظكم لعلكم تذكرون اذكروا الله يذكركم. Remember Allah and He will remember you. وَدَعُوهُ يَسْتَجِبْ لَكُمْ. Call upon Him and He will answer you. وَلَذِكْرُ اللَّهِ أَكْبَرُ وَاللَّهُ يَعْلَمُ مَا تَصْنَعُونَ. وَأَنْتَ يَا أَخِي أَقِمِ الصَّلَاةَ.
Allah